Our next guest, let me introduce you. Ro Edge has been, R-O, that's a short name. Actually, I must ask her. Actually, no, I'll ask her now. Rowena Edge is Chief Executive or spokesperson for, I don't want to make the same mistake again, Save Women's Sport Australasia. Ro's short for Rowena. Which do you prefer, Ro or Rowena?
Oh, I'm happy with either, Michael.
You don't mind?
No, I don't mind. My last name before I got married was Rawling, so I had a tongue twister of a name, hence I shortened it.
Oh, you mean like the door-to-door health people, Rawling?
Yes. Yeah, well, with a G on the end. I don't think they've got a G. I could be wrong.
Oh, I don't know. I miss them knocking at my door selling me garlic salt, I have to say.
Fair enough.
Do you remember that? Are you of that age where you remember the Rawlings van coming to your door?
Well, we were in the country, so we didn't get the van, but we did have the products. I do remember their salve and a blue
That's
tin.
right. They had a sort of menthol valve, didn't they?
Yeah, it was really good.
It was, yes, cured everything. My mother swore for it. But put that on, you'll be okay, go to school.
Yeah,
no, I
we had
remember
that too.
All right, now, Ro, you ended up, now what's the title, particularly of your role?
Oh, I'm just spokesperson for Safe Women's Sport Australasia, so one of the New Zealand spokesperson people, sorry.
So how long as an organisation have you been in existence?
We set up in 2020.
Right,
So,
and in both Australia and New Zealand, or one followed the other?
We New Zealand first, and then our counterparts in Australia were having bigger issues over there. They had a whole lot of South ID legislation go through for sport, for all of their sports without any consultation, and they kind of got into a panic. And Senator Claire Chandler, who's a bit of a legend in terms of speaking up for women's rights over in the Australian Parliament, got in touch with me and said, can you help them? And so we basically chatted and thought, well, this is silly, we're fighting the same fight, just join in with us. So we created the Australasia brand.
Right. And you were motivated by what in particular set you off? Or was it a cumulative effect?
Oh, I think it was a cumulative effect. It began with seeing Laurel Hubbard on the podium with the two amazing Samoan weightlifters at the Pacific Games when Laurel stole the gold medal off them, and just seeing how despondent they were and how unfair that was, just blatantly unfair. And then we had Kate Weatherly transitioned from male to female over a 3-week period in cycling and went on to win the women's downhill mountain biking competition, that like nationals, that very first year of transition. And, a female athlete, Shania Rawson, spoke up and was just given grief, really, on social media. And Cycling New Zealand told her she just had to train harder, like she could somehow make up for the biological difference. So she'd been a world number 2 mountain biker. And so I saw all of this, and I had a daughter who was about to head off on a US scholarship for sport, a niece who was training for the Olympics, and just thought this was grossly unfair and no one was doing anything about it. So I figured someone better.
You're now, I think, or I don't know if you are, but you're pejoratively referred to as a TERF, is that right?
Oh, yeah, amongst other things, bigot, Nazi, anything that allows people to give you abuse. I ignore it, to be honest. It's meaningless now, Michael, it really is.
No, fair enough. But you've been vilified probably as an individual, as an organisation. The sentiments that you've expressed have drawn the ire of, well, the woke brigade. Do they ever want to talk to you? I mean, is there ever sort of like, oh, listen, we disagree, so can we have a chat?
No, they don't want to chat because they can't debate their side. But the thing is, like, the sentiments that we're trying to get across is all we want to do is protect the female category for those born females so they have fairness, safety and opportunities in sport. We don't want to exclude anyone from sport at all. In fact, we want to include everyone and find ways for inclusion. But unfortunately, when you open up the female category, you're creating exclusion because you exclude females from their own category.
I haven't.
We need to stand.
I'll tell you what I haven't seen, and it's really interesting in all the polling that's done. I've never seen that particular issue addressed by any one of our major polling agencies in this country. It might have been. I might have missed it. Are you aware of any polling on this?
We did polling ourselves. So we fundraised and got Curia to undertake some polling for us. We did it in 2022 and again this year. And what's really interesting is this year, only 16% of Kiwis think it's a good idea for males to be able to self-identify into the female category. And last year it was 27%. So the more people see this, the more they're impacted by it, and the more it, is in front of their faces, the less they like it.
Yes.
So by far the majority of Kiwis are opposed to this. Even Labour voters are opposed to this. Only 21% think it's a good idea. Even Greens voters, only 38% of them think it's a good idea. So still by far the majority are opposed to it, yet they still pushed it through.
Now, I guess the thing that strikes me is that sporting, there was almost a sort of, we can't do anything about this. And then I think it was it the International Athletics Association started to push back?
It was actually World Rugby that started it.
Oh,
so
they
World
started,
Rugby,
did they? Yeah.
Yeah, World Rugby in 2020, they launched their, they went through a really amazing consultation and process basically to develop their transgender guidelines. So they looked at science, at law, at basically everything across the board. And then they got people who represented each side of the debate into a room, they presented, and then they got them to debate each other in front of a panel. It was amazing, but they wanted to make it public, but people wouldn't, those that were debating didn't want it to be public, or one side of those debating didn't want it to be public. So they launched their transgender policy in, I think it was March 2020, and immediately, and they asked the national unions to basically seriously consider adopting this because it was based on science, it was based on fairness, safety, all the rest. There was an orchestrated campaign by trans activists around the world to all of the national rugby unions, basically hammering them to now trans inclusion. So New Zealand Rugby Union was greatly affected by that. I was dealing with them at the time, and they basically said there was so much pressure, they decided to create their own policy. So they went to Sport New Zealand and said, look, we have some funding to do this. Sport New Zealand said, if we're going to fund you, let's develop guidelines for everyone. And this is how we have ended up with these transgender guidelines, which basically ignore the feelings, the fairness, the safety, the opportunities of females in order to allow anyone to self-ID into any category they like, and they can change it on a daily basis if they so wish.
Yeah, my son did that. He was given the year 10, he's in year 10, and as part of his PE syllabus about a month ago, and during the height of the World Cup, he self-identified as a female because he wanted to play in the girls' soccer team and give them a chance of winning a game. And when they said, you're having it on, he says, well, I'm only going to go self-identify for a week and then I'll go back to playing male sports, all right. So, I mean, that's the absurdity. I mean, kids have worked out the absurdity.
And did they allow him to?
Oh, no, he got into trouble for it because they said you're taking the piss, basically. To which he said, well, and he just used their own words back at them. Say, listen, if I self-identify, you can't question that. It's not your right to question. It's my choice.
Oh, Michael, I love your son. What a legend.
Yeah, we did get into trouble for it, but there you go. Listen. Well, listen, I don't know. People say he takes after his father. I go, I don't even know. I think it would have been that adventurous at 14. Now, can I just ask, Ro, a number of sporting organisations, you've just mentioned World Rugby, they started it. I think International Athletics have now got a gender standard. World Boxing, World Athletics, World Swimming, FINA as well, have now come on board. World Triathlon are revising their policy. There's a lot of international federations revising their policies. Unfortunately, the issue that we have in New Zealand is because Grant Robertson directed Sport New Zealand to prioritise inclusion, our national sporting federations feel like they are pressured to prioritise inclusion because, Sport New Zealand is not shy of using funding as a lever to get what they want. We saw that with the New Zealand Rugby Union when they didn't have quite enough females on their board. They were penalised through funding. So we've got a lot of international federations are coming around because it's just so obviously unfair and ridiculous, and I can't believe it's taken so long, or it's taking so long to sort this out. But change is happening slowly. Right, so Sport New Zealand have got what they call a diversity and inclusion policy, which states, and I'll quote it to you, everyone should have the opportunity to be actively involved in whatever sport or activity they choose, and then the next part, in whatever capacity they choose. That is Sport New Zealand's diversity and inclusion policy in a sentence. I guess you'd be wanting to change that, wouldn't you, though, seriously?
Yeah, we would. Yeah, we believe, for a start, our Human Rights Commissioner gave them really poor advice. He conflated gender with sex and basically said the sex-based protections in our Human Rights Act protected gender identity as well. So they've based that their policy is lawful on his interpretation. That needs to be tested in law. But also we need the next Parliament to actually put those protections in place and ensure that they're based on material reality of the person being born, either male or female, not their internal sense of gender. But the other policy change we need is requiring all departments, including Sport New Zealand, to adopt sex-based definitions of girls and women and, people of the female sex. So when they're developing policy and advice and recording statistics, they're based on reality.
You're going to have to change the policy of Sports New Zealand, as you say. And as you say also so accurately, they have a budget which they provide to sporting organisations who feel compelled, but like the Public Interest Journalism Fund. The funding comes with strings attached.
Yep, it does. So far, Boxing New Zealand have opposed Sporting New Zealand's guidelines, but as they said, they don't receive a lot of funding. But they did receive a letter letting them know that a team would be coming out to essentially re-educate them. I don't think that ever happened because they pushed back quite strongly against that. But I have hope that there is, so recently I attended the International Summit on Women's Sport over in the US, and I invited all sports to send a delegate, and only one did, but I'm hopeful that due to that, their policy will be changing and they will protect the female category at community level as well. So I think it will change. It's just, I don't know how long it's going to take to change in New Zealand. We seem to be behind the eight ball completely on this. I think we're in a race between Canada and Australia to see who can, undermine women's rights and erase women the quickest, really.
Have you, Raylene Castle's the chief executive. She used to be, I think, in charge of women's rugby in Australia. She did a god-awful job there, though. She's now the chief executive here. Have you had the opportunity to talk to her in any way?
Yes, I've had a number of Zooms with Raylene. She just thinks girls want to participate and that this is no threat to girls and that we're just being ridiculous. So she sees no issue with girls having to share their changing rooms with males, even young girls, not an issue. She doesn't think that it matters if some girls miss out on opportunities to succeed at sport. And she keeps coming back with it's only community sport, it doesn't matter. Well, community sport is pretty much all sport up until you represent your country.
Yes, in addition to which it does matter. I mean, I'll take my son's example. He's quite a good little football player. If he was to self-identify as a female and play in, a women's football team at 14 years of age, he would provide an unnatural advantage to whichever team, women's team, he played it.
Of course he would.
They would beat other teams and those teams would go, it's unfair, you've got an individual there who's a male, who's been a representative, age group representative male, playing for your sports team. And so results would not matter anymore, would they? I mean, that seems to be Raylene Castle's argument, is it? That results don't matter. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. You won't be upset if you go to the tournament and a team with 3 boys or ex-boys beats you. Is that her argument?
Yeah, pretty much.
Boy, she doesn't understand human nature, does she?
No, and she hasn't got children either, and I don't know.
Oh, that's it. That's the end of it. There you go. Yeah, you've explained it all. No,
so maybe there's just a complete lack of empathy in terms of how this really impacts women. I do not understand women who support these policies. I think that they're trying to buy into the being kind and to virtue signal, and maybe it's what they feel they've got to do to progress their careers. Maybe it's what Raylene felt she had to do to progress her career with Sport New Zealand, is to say that she would support all this nonsense. But it's incredibly frustrating because we all know it's unfair.
Amazingly, this is incredible. This is the guiding principles of Sports New Zealand, which is meant to be about the sport. But it actually has a glossary in its inclusion policy and definitions. And it actually has a word called ally. An ally is someone who supports and advocates for the equal treatment of a community other than their own. Allies have a crucial role to play in supporting transgender communities. That is part of a directive from Sport New Zealand. Isn't that incredible?
Nothing surprises me at the moment, to be fair. You know, when they brought out their draft, we thought it was bad, but when they brought out their finalised version, it was like, oh my gosh, it was even worse. And it even triggered, like I spoke to some, of our legacy media sports journalists, and they just saying, look, Ro, we're sitting here in the sports room just going, this is just completely mad, but we can't say anything. And I'm like, well, of course you can. And they're like, no, we're straight white males, we better not say anything or we'll just be persecuted. Everyone knows it's wrong, completely. Yeah. And you work through all of their transgender guidelines, and they put these little examples on of like how trans people might be affected. There is not one example of how the inclusion of a male in female sports and female changing rooms might impact that female. Unless that female complains, and then they basically will be disciplined and re-educated or excluded from their sport potentially, which we've already seen happening in New Zealand.
Yes, the other thing about transgender folk that New Zealand Sport also advocate, I see, Ro, is that transgender people, quote unquote, may be binary or non-binary, God knows what that means, and some but not all affirm their gender through medically transitioning, such as taking gender-affirming hormones or surgery. So in other words, as far as they're concerned, you don't have to be taking any drugs at all. You can just self-identify.
And actually by far the majority of males who self-identify as females don't do a thing.
Yeah, well, you need to change the government, just quietly.
Yeah, we do. We do need to change the government. So far, the only person that's come out really strongly on this is Winston Peters. He's come out with policy. He has kind of, I think, forced David Seymour to take a position on this, and David has said that, they should do the sex ID legislation in the BDMRR bill, and he's keen to get rid of the Human Rights Commission. But he did say in the BDMRR bill they recognise now that voting for it they didn't understand the implications. Now they do, that it needs revisiting. A Human Rights Act needs revisiting, so that there are protections for women and girls in certain circumstances. So, that's at least something. But as for Luxon, he just thinks it's all about bathrooms and it's not an election issue.
Yeah, he's an idiot. That's all right. It's okay. I'm not voting for him. No, the really interesting thing, though, is that these guiding principles for the inclusion of transgender people in community sport, which were published by, as you say, New Zealand Sport, they were published in December of last year. So they are current, as current gets, really.
Yeah, they launched them just before Christmas so that they would get minimum attention from the public.
Mm. All right. Now, the reason you're on the show, though, is not about this, which, listen, I don't think anybody would disagree with what you say. I know transgender people who say to me, just quietly, listen, we shouldn't be playing women's sport, we'd bowl the crap out of them. And, they argue, and I think that's another argument you could have, there should be a sport, or there should be sporting competitions for us if we can't compete in male ones. And I don't have a particular problem with that. If you want to do that, go off and do it. In fact, I think there are internationally. Are there internationally transgender sporting competitions devoted solely to transgender athletes?
Not at this stage, not international ones as far as I'm aware. There are talk about setting them up, but the thing is, a lot of these men that want to ID into the female category, they don't want to identify into a transgender category. They want to be affirmed as being female. So being in a trans category doesn't suit that purpose.
Yes, I suppose you're right. Yeah, I see it, yeah. Okay. All right, moving on. The reason you're on the show today is because you've written about the developments that have occurred over internationally. So you've brought us up to date with, listen, there's a lot of pushback now. People have, and they're not using cultural or political or ideological reasons. They use simply saying, look at the bloody science. And the science is so obvious that this would be wrong. And you're suggesting it. You've written the article and you've been turned down by a number of mainstream media organisations for publishing it. Which ones turned you down?
Yeah. So I actually wrote it before I headed away to the International Summit on Women's Sports. It would have been about mid-August, and they all rejected it. They came back and said, "Oh, we won't take this up at this time," or they just make cop-out excuses. But they reject all of our media releases. They very rarely. I can't recall the last time ran one. Maybe it was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. They refused to acknowledge our side of the debate. And, it's because I think they know that it's a loser for them. It's why if there's ever any post that they do on social media regarding the transgenders in sport, they turn off comments. They know the public don't like it, but, yeah, they just won't let our view be expressed at all.
Okay, so they're directly inhibiting free speech in a democratic society. That's appalling, particularly if you are mainstream media. We're talking about stuff in specific, which you'd expect because they are lefty liberals. But what other organisations declined you?
New Zealand Herald and Newsroom as well.
Oh, well, Newsroom's lefties.
And I think, yeah, and I think News Hub as well in the last one. We sent it to all the media outlets.
Right.
Yeah, so they pretty much all did.
Oh well,
I have been contacted for comment recently just on FEMA's announcement of an open category by News Talk ZB, so that was something. Although, I've had a pre-interview with them at one stage on a previous interview. They did a pre-interview and they were asking questions and said, well, actually, no, we won't ask you that. And I said, why is that? And they said, because if you say that answer, we'll get done by the Broadcasting Standards Authority. There was nothing contentious in my answer apart from calling males. But yeah,
that
was one thing that that's one thing that really came across strongly to me. Like at this International Women's Summit, is that I actually did a presentation on it. Is that we need to take back our language because I was guilty of this as well. Like trying to be kind and inclusive and all the rest. I used to call males who identified as women trans women. But that's really confusing because then if you say to people, look, trans women shouldn't compete in women's sport, they're hearing you say that women shouldn't compete in women's sport. And they're like, well, I don't know, is that unfair? But when you say that males who identify as women or as females compete in women's sport, they go, well, of course not. So we've had to take back our language, and that's why I refuse to use the term trans woman anymore. They're not women, they're men.
Yes, I don't use them. And also pronouns are he and she. I mean, this nonsense that there's some sort of ambivalence. There are. Caster Semenya is probably a really good case of somebody who has got male and female characteristics in her. She's freakish in that respect.
Well, Caster Semenya is a biological male, and the problem that we had a number of athletes. There was 3 of them, 3 DSC.
Has she got a vagina though too, hasn't she?
No, internal gonads. So it was a deformity kind of at birth, but he, or whatever, Caster has basically biological male characteristics. But because there's this disorder in the sex development, like in Africa, they're quite often when that happens, they're assumed to be female. And so at the Rio de Janeiro Olympics, there was 3 800-metre races.
Yes.
That runners. That were the three men on the podium. They were all DSD athletes, all biological male, but basically assigned incorrectly at birth. They were assigned female when they were actually male.
And that's because they were Africans. Is that right?
Well, it's just because of where they were in Africa and not having the medical expertise to be able to accurately understand their sex disorder.
Yeah, so there was Caster Semenya. Who were the other 2? You're absolutely right. Where was it? Was it at Rio in 2016?
Rio. Yeah.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, I can't recall the other 2's names, sorry. But yeah, but Caster was the one that basically took it to the Swiss Federation that adjudicates on all of this.
Yes, and the interesting thing is if you watch the race, and I have, it looks like 3 black men running against, well, all the rest of the field, I think, were women, white women. And boy, they all look like men.
Well, that's because they are.
Exactly. Yeah. One of them had
the Canadian coach wanted to speak up at the time because he felt it was really unfair. The thing is, it's not just missing out on medals, right? When you are an Olympian, it opens doors for the rest of your life. You are given platforms, you're given opportunities, you're given sponsorship. It really sets you up for life. So you take away those medals from females and those doors never open. So it's much more about just missing out on a medal. It's about your whole future going forward. And that was stolen from those girls. And the Canadian coach, who was the coach of the girl that came fourth, who should have been first, he wanted to speak up, and he was told by the Canadian Olympic Committee he had to zip it and not say anything. He came out recently publicly just saying how appalled he was that this has been allowed to happen. But yeah, we're seeing it happen more and more now with the whole trans stuff in sport. So at the end of the day, what it tells us is that our sporting leaders really don't give a flying crap about female sport. If they did, they would actually act and do something about this, because we all know they would never, ever let this unfairness happen in male sport.
Thank you very much, Ro, for bringing us up to date. It's useful to be reminded. I guess the good thing and a difference between a year ago having this conversation, which I think I did have a conversation with you like this about a year ago.
Did.
Now is that at least progress has been made. It's science-based, and it seems to be much more affirmative, at least on an international level, than it would have been a year ago, yeah?
Yes, I'm definitely feeling more positive. We will get there. I just think New Zealand is going to be lagging behind the rest of the world.
Oh, surprise, surprise. Thank you very much, Ro. Nice to join with you.
More people speak up.
Yeah, well,
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Not a problem. Well, good on her. That's Ro Edge. You would have heard that interview. We'll put it all up, obviously, on our social media and YouTube as well. But, yeah, go back and have a look at the 2016 Rio. Just Google it. 2016 Rio Olympics women's 800 metre event. All three of those, so all three intersex males took gold, silver and bronze. They all look like men. And yeah, the interesting thing usually is that when a drug cheat is caught, even going back to the London Olympics, I think, they void their title, try and get the medal back, and if they don't, get a new one, and then the silver goes up to the gold. Like, for example, Nick Willis was a good thing. When he finished fourth, and then he got third, and then he got second because of cheats ahead of him. What was that? Was that at Beijing in the 1500 metres? Good man, Nick Willis. Never got the fame that he deserves in this country. I suppose it's because he's not resident here, but interestingly, both him and Peter Snell took off to the United States of America because this wasn't such a conducive place for middle distance runners, and they're 50 years apart. Anyhow, cut a long story short, go and have a look at that race, and you'll see men running against women. You just have to, and this is one of those classic. Do you remember, Josh? My generation was given a fairy tale. I think it was Hans Christian Andersen, but the fairy tale was The Emperor's New Clothes. Did you get that?
Yes. Yeah, we did actually. I remember that at primary school actually.
Oh,
yep.
So you got it. Well, that's good. Okay, it's good to see that the generations are still having some things in common. But
I don't know if they do it anymore though, but...
Actually, probably not. That's a good question. Yes, it was. Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. I remember, I got it. It was actually published in the 1830s, along with The Little Mermaid. I'll tell you what though, can I just tell you that The Little Mermaid was a lot different than the Disney version. Anyhow, much sadder actually. But the plot is that two swindlers arrive at the capital city of an emperor who spends lavishly on clothing at the expense of looking after his country or his empire. And posing as weavers, they offer to supply him with magnificent clothes that are invisible to those who are stupid. Listen to this. They offer to supply him with magnificent clothes that are invisible to those who are stupid or incompetent. So the emperor hires them, and they set up looms and go to work. And a succession of officials and then the emperor himself visit to check their progress, and each sees that the looms are empty, but they pretend otherwise to avoid being thought of as stupid or incompetent. Finally, the weavers report that the emperor's suit is finished, and they mime dressing him, and he sets off in a procession before the whole city. And the townsfolk, unfortunately, go along with the pretense, not wanting either to appear inept or stupid, until a child blurts out that the emperor is wearing nothing at all. And the people then realise, as a result of the child simply saying, "But he's naked," that everyone has been fooled. And although startled, the emperor continues the procession, now walking more proudly than ever. Boy, is that folk tale redolent of today.